Two people, same pressure, same betrayal, same storm. One collapses, the other transforms. You've seen it. Two people face the same breakup. One spirals, the other upgrades. Same job. Loss. One breaks down, the other builds a business. Same insult, one's destroyed, the other smiles and walks away. So what's the difference? It's not strength. It's not experience. It's not even mindset. It's perception. Because reality isn't one thing. It's not fixed. It's not absolute. Reality is an agreement, a shared illusion, reinforced by repetition. It's a loop of interpretation echoed enough times that the brain calls it truth. But what if you stopped agreeing? What if you stopped treating other people's fear as your reality? What if you stopped matching the chaos around you? It responds to how solid your perception is. If your internal world is weak, you get absorbed by external noise. But if your internal world is immovable, external reality adapts. You become the anchor, the lens, the frame through which others start seeing everything. And that is ultimate control. Not domination, not debate, not argument, but silent authorship. People won't even know you changed them. They'll just start seeing through your logic, living inside your story. That's why you don't need to scream to shift the room. You just need to be the one thing that doesn't move. Still, composed, self-defining. Because when you stop needing others to agree, they start mirroring your clarity. When you stop chasing influence, you become the gravitational center, and suddenly, reality becomes optional. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped believing in theirs. And if part of you has always felt this but didn't know how to name it, this is your signal. Subscribe now. Because this isn't just content. It's a system upgrade. The moment you stop reacting, you start leading. And right here, we teach you how. So in this video, we won't teach you how to argue better. We'll teach you how to own your frame so completely that others start orbiting it. This is about internal dominance, the kind that makes persuasion unnecessary. Let's begin the silent shift. Before emotion, before action, before logic kicks in, there's something else. Something more subtle, more powerful, more dangereux. Perception. It's the invisible operating system behind everything you feel, everything you do, everything you fight for or surrender to. You're not reacting to reality. You're reacting to a version of it shaped by the way it was framed. And here's the problem. Most people don't even know they're inside someone else's frame. They think they're thinking for themselves. But they're not. They're echoing stories, mirroring culture, defending lenses they never consciously chose. Let's make it real. Someone ignores your message. That's just a fact. No reply. No response. But the meaning, that's the frame. You tell yourself, I'm not important. They're punishing me. Something's wrong with me. And just like that, the brain triggers an emotion, an identity, a self-story. That's perception. That's the battlefield. Not what is, but what you think it means. And that's where all control begins. Because once someone controls the meaning, they don't need to control your behavior. You'll do it yourself. You'll adjust. You'll apologize. You'll chase. You'll break down, not because of truth, but because of framing. This is why in every war, visible or invisible, the first move is psychological. It's not to attack your body. It's to confuse your lens. Who's right, who's wrong, who's valuable, who's disposable, the one who answers first wins. Because the one who frames the story controls how everyone else reacts. And here's the most terrifying part. Your brain hates empty space. It needs to fill the silence with meaning. So when something uncertain happens, it doesn't wait. It inserts the first available frame. Usually, someone else's. Now think about that. You could be building your entire emotional life on a belief that wasn't yours. On a perception installed by a teacher, a parent, an ex, or a culture that profits from your insecurity. And unless you stop, question, reframe, you'll defend that perception with everything you have. That's why arguments don't work. Because you're not fighting over facts. You're fighting over frames. So here's the truth. He who frames first, fights last. Because once your version of meaning is installed, you don't need to debate. You don't need to explain. You don't even need to convince. You just watch as people calibrate to the world you defined. This is the psychology of quiet power. Invisible dominance. Strategic perception. So from now on, when something stings, when something feels heavy, ask yourself, pause. Don't react. Ask this instead. Is this pain real? Or is it the product of a story I didn't write? Because in this life, you're either the author of meaning or the actor in someone else's narrative. And in every power dynamic, the one who controls perception owns the outcome. Whoever owns the frame owns the future. What you carry inside becomes what they feel outside. Let that land. Because in a world obsessed with appearances, the real source of dominance is invisible. It's not your clothes, not your tone, not your words. It's the energy you don't explain, but they still respond to. That energy comes from internal state. Here's the truth. No one teaches. People don't respond to what you say. They respond to how you feel about what you say. And that feeling, your internal vibration, writes the laws of the room. Imagine this. You walk into a space. Everyone's loud. Everyone's pushing. The energy is chaotic. But you're still. Not passive. Not weak. But centered. Composed. Suddenly, without saying a word, they lean not toward noise, but unshaken frequency. Not because they like you, not because you forced them, but because, in a chaotic system, the most stable node always becomes the reference point. This is physics, but it's also power. Because when your internal state is regulated, unshakable, untouched by their noise, you stop reacting to their world, and they start reacting to yours. That's how dominance begins. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't need acknowledgement. It broadcasts. Silently. Unapologetically. And others, consciously or not, begin to attune. This is how someone with no title, no loudness, no social leverage, walks into a room and resets the temperature. You've seen it before. The one who doesn't rush, who doesn't interrupt, who doesn't compete. And yet, when they finally speak, everyone leans in. That's not charisma. It's not manipulation. It's internal law, projected outward. Because once you've stabilized yourself, you become the architecture that others unconsciously rest inside. And it gets deeper. When your reality becomes non-negotiable, not through force, but through quiet clarity, others stop trying to pull you into theirs. Instead, they question their own. Not because you told them to, but because your stillness makes their chaos obvious. You don't explain. You don't react. You don't defend. You just exist as an alternative reality that doesn't wobble when theirs does. And that presence, that's pressure. Stillness becomes instruction. Calm becomes confrontation. Centeredness becomes control. The most powerful leaders aren't loud. They're the ones who carry an inner law so solid, the room rearranges itself to match it. So here's the shift. When you no longer need external validation, you stop negotiating perception. You become a living signal. And people don't resist signals. They sync to them. Because the brain, in times of uncertainty, doesn't search for truth. It searches for stability. And once it finds it, it follows. So ask yourself, are you transmitting confusion or command? Are you mirroring the chaos or resetting it? Because at the highest level of control, you don't convince. You just embody. And once your internal world becomes non-reactive, your external world stops running the show. Reality becomes optional when you stop needing others to validate yours. They talk. They argue. They raise their voice, hoping volume will equal influence. But it never does. Because in any space, the one who bends reality isn't the loudest. It's the most undisturbed. Let that sink in. We've been trained to believe that power means dominating the conversation. That influence means winning the argument. But that's not how frames shift. That's not how reality bends. Reality shifts when someone enters the room and doesn't wobble. No matter what's said, no matter what tension arises, they hold their ground not with force, but with presence. Unshaken, untouched, unafraid. Because true dominance isn't reactive. It's foundational. And that foundation is built in silence. Let's go deeper. When a group is debating, trying to figure it out, there's chaos. People talk over each other. Energy spikes. But then there's one person. They're not trying to interrupt. They're not raising objections. They're just still, composed, observing. And yet the group begins to shift. Words slow down. Tension softens. Tone drops. Why? Because the nervous system always calibrates to stability. The loud person creates friction. The silent, unshakable one creates orbit. They don't pull the room. They allow the room to adjust itself around them. That's how silent narrative works. You don't need to insert your logic. You just hold it. Fully. Without apology. Without over-explaining. And the pressure of your certainty, without aggression, makes others question their own. Because when your narrative remains undisturbed, theirs starts to feel unstable. Here's the tactical truth. You don't win by injecting more. You win by leaking nothing. Every time you defend, you tell them there's something to attack. Every time you over-clarify, you admit you need to be understood. But when you stay still, when you radiate an internal script that doesn't flinch, you become the quiet mirror that distorts their performance. They start reacting to your silence. They start adjusting to your rhythm. Don't confuse silence with absence. It's alignment without announcement. And eventually, they surrender, not because you convinced them, but because their story collapsed next to yours. The loudest person doesn't shift the room. Noise distracts. Stillness restructures. If this resonates not as something new, but as something you've always known quietly, subscribe. Because once you learn to hold your signal, you stop chasing reality and start writing it. This channel exists for those who lead without needing to be seen. So next time you're surrounded by noise, don't join it. Anchor yourself. Because your stillness is the signal their nervous system never knew it was seeking. Most people wait for evidence before they believe. They wait for signs, for validation, for permission. And that's exactly why they follow. Because true influence doesn't wait for proof. It creates it. That's the power of belief, not as hope, but as a weapon. See, belief isn't soft. Belief bends steel if it arrives first. It says, I don't care what reality looks like right now. I've already installed a new version. And that installation, it doesn't need acceptance. It doesn't need applause. It only needs one thing, conviction. Let me show you how it works. Picture this. You're in a room full of skeptics. Everyone doubt. Everyone questions. Everyone needs data. But you're sitting still, eyes calm, voice steady, and you say, I don't negotiate reality. I install it. That's not arrogance. That's structure. That's power. That's the inner authority of someone who doesn't need the room to agree, because the room is already moving toward what they hold inside. And slowly, without resistance, they start to lean in. They start to adjust. Not because they were convinced, but because their own doubts became too exhausting to maintain. Here's what you need to know. People don't follow truth. They follow certainty. If your belief stands longer than their doubt, you win. If your narrative stays intact while theirs crumbles, you become the gravity. They become the orbit. It's not a debate. It's a slow transfer of authority. And here's the twist. Once they start repeating your words, once they begin referencing your vision as if it was always theirs, you've possessed their perception, not through force, but through consistency. You never chased agreement. You simply became the stillness they couldn't shake. That's controlled delusion, not insanity, not fantasy, just an early draft of the future held with absolute calm. And when held long enough, it turns into consensus, then into law, then into memory. So remember this, the world doesn't belong to those who describe reality best. It belongs to those who believe first, and refuse to flinch. The game was never just about words. It was never just about logic. It was always about how you feel before you even know what to think. Because most manipulation doesn't arrive as commands. It arrives as currents. Subtle emotional pulses that drag your nervous system into their frame. Guilt, shame, urgency, fear. These aren't random emotions. They're electrical charges, wires they attach to you to keep you reactive. To keep you enrolled in a version of reality they control. Here's how it works. They don't need to convince you. They just need you off balance. Because once you're emotionally hijacked, your mind stops being yours. Your decisions start becoming reflexes instead of strategy. But there's a way out. And it doesn't involve shouting, or blocking, or fighting back. It begins with one shift: emotional immunity. It's the ability to feel the charge rising and not plug in. To see the bait and not bite. Let's make this real. Someone texts you. I guess you just don't care anymore. It looks like a message. It's not. It's a hook, a test. But you don't respond. You don't react. You don't explain. You just pause, breathe, stay still. And in that stillness, you rupture the spell. Why? Because they didn't want truth. They wanted access. Access to your self-doubt. Access to your guilt. Access to the version of you that dances when they pull strings. But when you don't dance, they don't know what to do. Their script malfunctions. Their power dissolves. And the real lesson is this: their emotional world only exists if you validate it with your energy. If you don't step into their storm, you don't have to survive it. And here's what most people never understand: you don't need walls. You don't need loud boundaries. You just need sovereignty over your internal state. That's the firewall. That's the defense system that doesn't activate. Because it never gets triggered. You stop leaking energy. You stop negotiating for peace. You stop apologizing for not playing the emotional games you never signed up for. Because in the end, they only control the story if you still feel it. And when you no longer feel what they need you to, you disappear from the script they built. When you don't plug into their current, their world collapses without you. What if you didn't need to persuade anyone? What if reality didn't need to be explained, but felt not through argument, but through gravity? See, most people live in borrowed worlds. Constructs they never built. Beliefs they never questioned. Truths they inherited, like passwords, to systems they didn't design. And they walk through life desperate for reference points, searching for something, someone to stabilize, what they call truth. Now enter you. You're not louder. You're not smarter. You're not even trying to be understood. But your rhythm is different. Your emotional pace unrushed. Your nervous system unshaken. Your presence still, and yet undeniable. And here's the secret no one tells you. When you stay fully inside your own logic, you become a gravitational field. People feel you long before they understand you. They adjust their tone. They lower their volume. They pause their chaos because something about you doesn't move. And what doesn't move starts to define what's real. Let's take a real-world example. You enter a room full of noise. People joking, competing, over-explaining. No one listening. Everyone reacting. You don't join the chaos. You don't compete for airtime. You sit. You look. You listen. But not passively. You're calculating, noticing patterns, tracking the emotional current but not riding it. And in just a few moments, something shifts. The volume drops. The pace slows. Eyes start drifting in your direction, not because you demanded it, but because you anchored the space in something stronger. This is how reality is imposed, not by force, but by consistency of internal frequency. It's not about what you say. It's about what you stay. You stayed composed. They started calibrating. You didn't defend your views. They started adopting your frame just to stay near your certainty. Because certainty is rare. And people, even powerful people, crave it. They crave the feeling of clarity you carry inside your silence. They crave the world you refuse to decode, but never disappear. And the moment you realize this, you stop trying to lead. You stop trying to convince. You stop reacting. Because you now understand, the person who speaks less but holds more reality becomes the filter everyone sees through. You become the lens. You become the map. You become the truth that no longer needs permission. Real power doesn't speak louder. It radiates steadier until everything else adjusts. It's not dominance. It's inevitability, the kind that doesn't knock. It just enters. And that is how you become the new center of gravity inside a world that was never stable to begin with. Real power isn't seen. It's absorbed. You were never meant to fit the world. You were meant to bend it by refusing to betray your own frequency. This isn't about dominating people. It's not about proving you're right. It's not even about being heard. It's about something much quieter, much deeper, much harder, holding your reality in a room full of collapsing ones. Think of it this way. Every room you walk into is looking for a reference point, a center, a gravity, a signal strong enough to override the static. Most people try to be accepted, try to be agreeable, try to align with the emotional current. But the few who don't, who stay centered, clear, and slow, those are the ones everyone else begins to orbit. Because in a world of noise, stillness becomes truth. In a world of reaction, composure becomes power. In a world of doubt, certainty becomes law. And that's the shift. The highest form of control isn't external. It's internal dominance, so steady that others begin recalibrating just to stay near your signal. You're not changing reality. You're becoming the source code that others start writing from. You're not taking control. You're becoming the reason others question theirs. So here's the call. Stop adapting to their perception. Stop softening your clarity. Stop molding your rhythm to match someone else's chaos. Begin living as the origin, the axis. The baseline frequency reality begins to measure against You don't have to argue. You don't have to dominate. You just have to hold. Hold your vision. Hold your pace. Hold your frequency. Long enough that the world begins to bend around it. Because here's the truth. When your perception becomes immovable, their reality becomes optional. That's not force. That's gravitational leadership. And that's your final advantage. You've made it this far not because you were convinced, but because you remembered. Remembered that power isn't what you show, it's what you hold. Subscribe now and keep upgrading from the inside. Because reality bends for those who refuse to. Drop the noise. Hold your signal. And let the world shift around the only thing that didn't move.